Welcome, family, to another book summary. We're looking today at The Art of Thinking in Systems, a book by Schuster. The Art of Thinking in Systems. By the way, do share as you follow along the summary which parts of the summary appeal to you the most, which parts most resonate with you. Let's continue to grow together. Now, the art of thinking in systems, as according to Schuster, he mentions that it's a book aimed at helping you improve your logic, think more critically, as well as use proven systems to solve your problems. It is a strategic planning for everyday life. Well, to stick around to enjoy the book summary. So, The Art of Thinking in Systems by Schuster. We learn here that you too can think more completely, can understand why certain things happen to you. Interesting, hey? Sometimes by chance and sometimes by law, things do happen. Or, you can also learn in this book how to become more productive and maybe even finding shortcuts where no one else is looking, and how to improve your relationships and even understand why certain arguments truly arise. Everything in the world around us is part of a system. So whether we like it or not, whether we care to accept and adjust and adapt or not, we already find ourselves part of a system. Systems thinking is then being able to examine and analyze ourselves and the things around us with the purpose of, being able to improve upon them. So Schuster argues that your whole life is a system, and that systems thinking is a realization that everything is interconnected, and we should look at things as a whole rather than just a group of independent parts. So even if something has happened, never think of incidents in isolation. Consider how they do connect, how they are, part of one system, okay, and how they are interconnected, and how understanding them in their entirety will help you and it will be towards your better good. It is about looking at the big picture first and then digging in deeper to examine its parts and the relationships between the different parts. So even if these items are in isolation, it helps to actually assess the bigger picture, understand the bigger picture, and thereby be able to follow, how these different individual parts, branch out from the big picture, as well as how they are connected to the big picture, because the system is interconnected. So we learn in the various chapters of the book, for example, what is systems thinking? Okay, so we learned that systems thinking helps us to look at the world in a new way, because it encourages us to look at events and patterns by focusing on the connection and relationship between the system's parts instead of only looking at the individual parts in isolation. If you're going to focus on the one item and try and focus on and try and solve the one item, it could help, but that will be a temporal solution. But if you learn to focus at the big picture and how this individual item, even is connected to the big picture, and see the root cause, in the big picture, you're able to come up with more long-term solutions. So quite often, we focus on external sources as the cause of all our problems, instead of looking internally at our systems to see what improvements can be made. Whether you like it or not, you probably have a system. It can be a flawed system. It can be a system that does not, serve you in any way, but most likely you have a system, okay? It's another thing if you're following it consistently. It's another thing if it is going to lead to the results that you want. But in most cases, you'll find that there is a system that you actually are following yourself. So there is that one, when we fail to take time to examine our internal systems, sometimes our external solutions can create new problems. So you came up with a solution to deal with this isolated problem, and it worked for that problem, but now it brings a new kind of problem, and then you have to deal with that problem. Then there's a new kind of problem that also comes up because you're dealing with the smaller problems and not the actual root cause of everything. So we learned here that a problem with systems, well, we need to understand whenever you're dealing with a problem, you need to understand, is it a problem with the system that you're following, right? Is it a flawed system that you're following? Or is it that, no one wanted to create this problem, but but everyone wants the solution, right? It happens a lot of times that the problem is there, everybody wants the solution. No one wants to admit that this problem was created by whatever actions were being followed in the past, or maybe even still being followed. But a lot of times people won't admit that they and their actions have led to certain results. So everyone wants the solution, but they won't get the solution until until they take a good look and a hard look at the structures and the systems that are in place, that they've set in place. So, for example, there's an illustration made of a blindfold, like a child who's been blindfolded, or kids who were blindfolded, and they were given certain components to try and guess what this is, and the kids guessed the individual items, and the task was for them to guess the individual items and also try and guess what all of these items together would mean that they would do, the activity that they would do. And the kids started guessing, and they guessed all the items wrong, and as a result, they guessed the overall activity wrong. So that was to show how if you have a false diagnosis of the individual parts of a problem that you're dealing with, it could actually lead to a false diagnosis of the system that you're dealing with, thereby, resulting in you not attending to the cause of situations. So we learn also in this book that the different parts of a system, include elements, include interconnections, as well as a purpose, for human beings, or function if it is, non-living things. So like a function is for non-human systems, and a purpose is for human systems. So we learned here that elements, are probably the actors in your system, the different parts, the components of the system, and they are the ones that do the work, So for example, in your own body, you find that you have a circulatory system. So the elements in that system will be the heart, for example, the workers, the lungs, the blood, the arteries, the veins, they are the ones doing all of this work. And then the interconnections would be, the flow of blood and the oxygen, and how your blood flows, throughout your whole body. And then you find that the functions, of the system, the function of the system is to actually allow blood and oxygen and other gases, and the nutrients to flow through the body and reach, the different parts of the cells, and thereby allowing your body to function the way that it's supposed to function. So we learned here that systems are everywhere. So everywhere we find systems, and in comparison, they're everywhere, and you find them, for example, in companies, you find them in cities, you find them in governments, you find them in economies. They are everywhere. So whether we care to admit it, whether we care to understand it, there is awareness being raised in this book that there are systems everywhere. So what is not a system? Okay, so anything that is only a collection of items without the interconnections, for example, or the function or the purpose, that is not a system. Okay, so if not all three parts, the elements, interconnections, as well as their function or purpose, if not all these three parts are represented in this, then most likely it is not really a system. Okay, so for example, if you randomly put things together, it is not a system, because how are these things going to come together? The interconnection, if it's not there, then most likely you don't have that unifying function, right? You don't have that common goal. So you probably don't have a system. So these parts need to all be represented in order for there to be a system, a genuine system that will actually work. We also learn in this book the types of thinking. Okay, so we also learn that out of all of these types, all of them are important and they serve different functions. So sometimes it's better, if you had this kind of thinking, but and you find that in other cases that thinking will not serve you, but a different kind of thinking would have served you better. Okay, so we learn here of linear thinking, which is a cause and effect kind of thinking, right? This is the kind of thinking that is being taught at schools, right? There is a problem, there is a solution, most likely one solution. This is how you attend to this problem, okay? There is a beginning and there is an end, okay? This is how this is done. So, for example, you failed your test. This is the effect, right? And when you trace that back, it must be because you didn't study enough, right? That must be the cause. So study next time, and study well next time, so that you will not have the same effect, which is failing your test. So linear thinking is, like a quick way to find a solution, because you trace back the effect and, it'll immediately lead you to, the cause. It must be because of this. So linear thinking, it also has disadvantages, even though it appears as quite simple, quite straightforward, straight line, right? It has disadvantages as well, in that it doesn't really look at things in complex ways, right? It doesn't see things as the complex systems that they belong to, but it only focuses on one small piece of a much larger puzzle. Okay, so this is one way, again, like we said, which is taught at schools for the most part, but this is one way which is very, very limited, because then it does not really groom a person to assess the bigger picture, right? To see how the full system comes into play. And then we get another kind of thinking, which is an event-oriented thinking. Okay, now this one views the world as more complex than linear thinking, okay? But also it sees the world as a series of events, okay? So it is believed that an event is something that has a will, right? Or that it has, right? It will happen. And if we change the cause, then the event will also change, okay? So it's more like, if we do this, if we change this, right, this part will not happen as well. And so event-oriented thinking, it suggests that if we do A, then B will happen. If we don't do A, then B will not happen. Okay, and our brains love this kind of thinking, as it is quite familiar and it feels safe, right? It's sort of like straightforward, similar to linear thinking. It's very straightforward kind of thinking, right? Again, it has its disadvantages too. And then we also learn of lateral thinking. This one involves more creative thinking, okay, that isn't immediately obvious to those who rely heavily upon traditional logical thinking, to reach conclusions. So lateral thinking, it states, or it starts to generate new and innovative ideas in a way that we can easily repeat over time. Okay, so it's the one that is closer to to leading to a system, because we have a kind of a method that we can repeat over time. So the disadvantage with lateral thinking is that a clear objective and ending may not be identified, right? It may not always be clear. So this type lacks structure and it lacks the goals which other types of thinking capitalize on, right? So these are the disadvantages of this lateral kind of thinking. We also get critical thinking, which is quite effective when you are trying to find logical connections between ideas, right? So critical thinkers, they pride themselves in this label. They don't accept things at face value. They always dig deeper to be sure that there is rational thought and solid reasoning behind any information, that they receive and that are presented to them before they accept it as true. So this type of thinking is important and should just be monitored to ensure it isn't taken to the extreme, because it can also be limiting, quite self-destructive, because it becomes quite overly critical at times, right? But again, it is a critical kind of thinking, so it needs to be critical. So it's quite interesting like that. And then you also get systems thinking, as we keep on discussing, which is a more complex, which assesses the bigger picture of things, which believes everything, stems from that big picture. And, even the small components, they stem from the big picture, and it is quite, interconnected, right? And, it is interconnected, includes elements as well as a function or a purpose. Right, so one should actually always assess, what kind of thinking that they have, and it is quite useful to understand what type of thinking you're following, and also assess if you are comfortable with that kind of thinking. In some cases, it will be quite hard to change, but it's quite good to understand, where you're starting from, and be able to know where you're headed. And some great news as well. You apparently can shift from linear thinking patterns to system thinking. I always love it when I read about such and learn that there's something I can do about it. So once again, with this as well, you're not stuck into a kind of thinking that you don't really want to keep. You actually can, shift from one kind of thinking to another. So you definitely can shift from linear thinking to systems thinking. So one thing that our author here suggests is that you need to decide if something is a problem or a symptom. Is it a problem or a symptom? So linear thinking, for example, focuses on symptoms. Okay, so like you go to a doctor's office, and then they ask you what are the symptoms of your problem. Oh no, I've got aches and pains, and then they give you something to address the symptoms, right? So that is what linear thinking does. It will address the symptoms. It focuses on the symptoms, but it leaves the problem still there. So this way, can solve the symptoms, but if the root cause of the symptoms is deeper, then the real problem will always be there. You'll find yourself, always coming back to the same issue because you haven't addressed the actual issue. You just have attended to the symptoms, right? Yeah, to the pop-ups that come up, but you haven't attended to the root cause of the problem. So it's actually high time, that you focus on dealing with the actual problem. Go deeper. What is the root cause of the problem? In most cases, it becomes quite internal, right? It becomes in the system that is being used, in a flawed system, right? In a system that's being used probably haphazardly, inconsistently, right? And which is actually working against the cause of it being there in the first place. So if you're going to focus again on the actual problem versus the symptoms, you will be headed in the right direction, the kind of direction that you most likely are interested in. Well, we learn also of 10 enemies of systems thinking. Okay, now this was an eye-opener for me. Okay, so for example, number one, when people say, hey, let's fix it quick, right? So these quick ways, these shortcut ways to fixing problems, okay, they will work, they will address the problem, but in most cases, they're only addressing the symptom, right? Yeah, like I have a headache. Here's a painkiller, right? But what is the cause of the headache, right? Is it because of stress, right? Is it because of a cold? Is it because of lack of sleep, right? as long as that root cause is not being addressed, that headache will keep coming. Okay, so people who focus on quick ways to solve things, right, they only address symptoms and they miss the actual problem. Also, number two, when people say just put a band-aid on it, right, you just cover it up. Okay, it's like when a toddler or when a child, a teen, a lazy teen cleans their room and then they just throw everything in the closet and they close it. No folding, nothing, no packing anything in its place, but throwing shoes and clothes and toys, in the closet and trying to force everything inside and close that closet. Yeah, and let's cover it up. Don't look that direction. It's all good, right? And in some cases, yeah, the room will look clean, but you know what? There's an issue in that closet. That closet is a problem which is not being attended to. Okay, so these band-aid methods, okay, again, they are short term. They don't assist with dealing with the issues for long term. Also, number three, when a person says we need the budget, finalized before the end of the year, before the end of the month, okay. So a lot of times budgets cause us to make choices based on money rather than what is best. Sometimes, people become so limited by, the money that's there, okay? Because of the budget, we're going to go for cheap labor. We're going to go for this and this instead of focusing on values, instead of focusing on what we stand for, on focusing on certain standards that we need to keep. Because of the budget, you find that people are just going for anything that'll go. And it ends up costing more, right? Because now you have to keep on fixing what you have already attended to because you were thinking of the budget. So it's really not helpful when you think that way. Okay, so it forces you again to focus on the little money that you have rather than focusing on what is best. Okay, but if you focus on your systems, right, on what is best and do what needs to be done and doing it well, right? There's a saying that we're reminded of in this book that says anything worth doing is worth doing well. Okay, so make sure that you do it quite well. And also, immediately when you add a deadline to something, you're actually removing the systems part of things, because a system is actually going to, progress quite gradually, okay, and it needs to be followed. It also needs its own time. But if you're going to set a deadline, what if it has not reached its full maturity and already you are measuring it, this is it, because this is the deadline, okay? So be careful, be mindful of that as well. All right, so that was number three, where we learned that, don't focus too much on a budget. Don't focus too much on deadlines when you want to improve on a system, okay? And then number four, people who say we must respond right away, okay? Some things don't need you to respond right away. Some things need you to think them over. Some things need you to assess how they fit into the big picture. Some things need for you to consult certain, participants, before you act, right, or observe or allow certain things to actually be revealed before you act. So this whole quick response method is not really useful. And also people who would say, hey, who cares? Well, that kind of thinking also, will lead people to just doing things for the sake of, right? And kind of move things, trying to kind of move, quickly, getting things quickly out of the way, because at the end of the day, people care, you care as well. Okay. You want these results to come out quite well. And we find number six that when people say we need more information, gather more, give me more, you will receive, abundance. Well, not necessarily abundance, but you'll be overwhelmed. You'll be overwhelmed by all of what's in front of you. And in some cases that can also trap you, because now you have all of this, you've gathered all of this, and, not all of it is something that you need, so gathering a lot more information is not always useful towards a systems thinking, and especially a systems action, okay, because it can lead you to spending more time on data and take away from you acting, and acting is actually way more important. Also, when people say, no, you're overthinking things. Okay, you know what, overthinking also is a bit of a problem. This perfectionist kind of thinking, everything must be perfect. I can only do this when the stars are well aligned, right? What if they never are? Okay, so in some cases you actually have to take that first step, follow your gut, but also do things in the right way without necessarily waiting for perfect environments and situations, because what if they're never there? Okay. And also when when you forget others, or when you say, what, let me forget other people and just take care of myself, right? Yeah, forget our competitors, let's just focus on our company and stuff. You can't really do that, because like we said, we are interconnected, right? And other people will be affected, right? And what other people do will affect you as well. So you want to be mindful, you want to be aware. It doesn't mean that you acting in a conformist kind of a way, but you do want to consider what other people are doing and how their actions are going to affect you as well. And then also we learn that we don't want any conflict, right? Or when a person says, I don't want any conflict. Well, sometimes you can't really avoid this conflict, and life is not necessarily about avoiding conflict. It's about a win-win sometimes, right? About finding the best practices to deal with even conflict, rising up better and stronger amid the conflict, which in most cases will be there. The last one, when you say we will do it this way, okay, trying to force your way in doing things and not paying attention to alternatives and what other people in your group can contribute. It's not always about you, even if you are the leader. It's not always about you. It's about also hearing what others have to contribute. So these are kind of the points that stood out for me as I read this book. Do share the points that stood out for you as you read this book as well. Thank you so much. We'll meet again at the next book summary.